Excuse me, ma'am. That is your chair. That is your chair, Kiki. Hi there, my name is Dee, and this week's video is for the Art Addicts Alliance. The AAA is made up of these lovely people, all artists here on YouTube, and every month we collaborate together to create artsy pieces based on 2 voted prompts. All of their channels are linked in the description below, so be sure to check them out when you finish this video. Our choices this time were Deep Ocean or Recreate Famous Painting. I went with the latter. I chose to do The Starry Night by Vincent Van Gogh. I'll be using my Arteza gouache set that I created a pan palette for. You can see the process for that in the video linked above. Ew, what is that? Seems my yellow ochre gouache has grown some mold. That is disgusting. I did contact Arteza to let them know, but I think since all the other paints have done just fine, I might have just shut the palette while there was still water on the paint. I'm not sure. These have been in this palette for about a month, so yeah. Yuck. No problem, I'll just scoop out the mold and refill it with fresh paint. All better. Excuse me, ma'am. Miss. Kiki. Kiki. What are you doing? This is my chair. This is my chair. That is your chair. That is your chair, Kiki. So bright. I quickly laid out some guides for where certain elements in the painting sit, and I'm going to be trying my best to capture the feeling and energy of the painting. To be honest, before I started this project, I didn't know much about Vincent Van Gogh or his artwork. I never took any art or art history classes in school. I chose this painting to do as a study because it has a very loose style and it's a landscape, both things I struggle with. So maybe let's talk about the history of this painting and Van Gogh and learn something together. Quick disclaimer, this information I found on a few different articles. I'll have all my sources linked in the description, but if something I say is incorrect, don't hesitate to kindly correct me in the comments section and state your sources so we can all learn together. So Vincent van Gogh was born in 1853 in the Netherlands and lived until 1890, so he lived to be about 37 years old. Which is crazy because he didn't start pursuing painting seriously until he was 27 years old. His first paintings were inspired by realism artists like Jean-François Millet. Van Gogh's early paintings were made up of dark color palettes and showed what life was like for commoners in the countryside. These paintings were not successful though because the French did not like their dark hues and unpleasant subject matters. He was creating pieces that were inspired by his surroundings in the Netherlands at the time, which consisted of miners and peasant farm workers. As he traveled around, and he traveled a lot, I believe he lived in England, France, and Belgium, his approach to his paintings became more light and colorful with his learned skill developing and his surroundings and inspirations evolving. After working to brighten up his color palettes and developing his signature brushwork, Van Gogh moved to a city in the south of France called Arles, where he would ultimately create this painting, The Starry Night. There are many interpretations of the painting, just like with most art. This is what one article states about the painting. Van Gogh was a huge fan of nighttime, and his passion for this was depicted in Starry Night and a number of other nocturnal canvases, such as Starry Night over the Rhone and Café Terrace at Night. In the Starry Night painting, Van Gogh's night sky is brimming with energy, and it contrasts with the silent village below. The town he depicts in Starry Night is somewhat invented, and the church spire brings to mind his homeland, the Netherlands. Van Gogh includes a cypress tree, which is usually found in cemeteries and associated with mourning. This tree serves to connect earth and sky, and this could reflect the artist's own thoughts about death, that death is the destination of life's journey. Many believe that Starry Night is a reflection of Van Gogh's torment at the time. Its bold brushwork and vivid colors contrasting with the dark tones of the night sky are believed to symbolize Van Gogh's frame of mind and his search for hope during a time of great illness. Van Gogh suffered most of his life from severe depression, and this painting was one of 150 paintings painted while he was checked into a mental asylum, which he checked himself into because he was aware of his deteriorating mental state. So just prior to this, Van Gogh had been living in what was called the Yellow House, where he lived with fellow artist Paul Gauguin. He basically just wanted some roomies to hang out and make art together, and they did, for 9 weeks. That doesn't seem like a long time, and it really isn't, but I read that in the 9 weeks of living together, Van Gogh painted 36 canvases and Paul completed 21. But all good things must come to an end because supposedly after several disagreements, Paul moved out of the Yellow House, and this caused Van Gogh, whose mental health was already on the decline, to cut off part of his own ear with a knife. But more art came out of it because then he proceeded to paint a self-portrait entitled Self-Portrait with a Bandaged Ear. During the last 2 months of his life, Van Gogh stayed at an inn where he produced over 80 paintings and 60 sketches. He was getting better at painting, but still wasn't finding a lot of success in selling them. He only sold 1 painting in his lifetime. This caused him to be suffering financially because this is what he was spending all of his time doing. He wasn't working. His brother Theo was actually supporting him so that he could pursue this career. So all of that, among other things, was causing his mental state to worsen. On July 27, 1890, Van Gogh was shot in a wheat field, which was the setting of his final painting. He died 2 days later. There is some controversy surrounding whether he was attempting or that he was actually a victim of accidental manslaughter or foul play by another person, according to the supposed evidence that the angle in which the bullet entered his stomach doesn't coincide with how one would comfortably hold a gun to themselves with. The fact that he even had a gun despite his well-known mental health problems, and that there were no black powder burns from firing a gun on his hands. Even if it were someone else who did it, Van Gogh evidently looked at it as a favor because he is quoted as saying, "My body is mine and I am free to do what I want with it. Do not accuse anybody. It is I that wish to commit." When sitting at his brother's bedside, Theo is quoted as saying, "He himself wanted to die. When I sat at his bedside and said that we would try to get him better, and that we hoped that he would then be spared this kind of despair, he said, 'The sadness will last forever.' I understood what he wanted to say with those words." When his doctor told Van Gogh that he still wished to save his life, Van Gogh replied, "Then I'll have to do it over again." Phew, I learned a lot. Feel bad for the guy. He obviously had a great passion for art and spent a long time learning from other different artists and honing his skills. A few things kind of trip me up about his whole story, which is not just a story. This was a real person's life, so all due respect to him. The fact that his early paintings, which I think are still incredible, didn't do well with buyers, so he had to change up his style, it's kind of sad. It's definitely something that's still prevalent today. You know, if you want to be successful, the easiest way is to give the people what they want. It's interesting that, like so many other artists, he didn't receive fame and recognition until after his death, which is also incredibly sad. The article here shares a quote from Van Gogh to his brother Theo in 1878, just 12 years before his death, where he said, "If only we try to live sincerely, it will go well with us, even though we are certain to experience real sorrow and great disappointments. And also will probably commit great faults and do wrong things. But it certainly is true that it is better to be high-spirited, even though one makes more mistakes, than to be narrow-minded and all too prudent. It is good to love many things, for therein lies the true strength, and whosoever loves much performs much and can accomplish much. And what is done in love is well done." What I find fascinating is that he said this during the time he was using dark colors and creating inspired works. And as his art evolved over time with each phase of his life, the paintings got brighter and more pleasing to look at. At the same time, his mental health was declining and his outlook on life getting more grim until he eventually, allegedly, himself. This man had such an impact on the artistic world, yet he wasn't rich. His family did not support his dreams, except for his brother Theo. He didn't seem like he had a very happy life. He was plagued with mental health issues. Is there anything we can learn from this? Incredibly, Van Gogh considered the Starry Night to be a failure. He briefly mentioned in a letter to his brother Theo that it was just a night study, and decided to not send the painting back to his home in the Netherlands because he didn't like it as much as his other works. Today, it stands to be one of, if not the first piece that comes to mind when someone mentions his name. Maybe we feel this way about our own art. We don't share certain pieces because they feel insignificant, just a study or a failure. What do you think of Van Gogh's work? I hope you enjoyed watching me recreate this beautiful painting and listening to some art history. Please remember to check out the rest of the AAA, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!